The critics are always wrong. Maybe not always, but they sure have trashed some awesome movies. So here's 10 rotten movies that I love. While I'm talking, let me know down below in the comments section, which movies do you love that the critics trashed? Also, on my Patreon page, I've got 10 more rotten movies that I love. Patreon is a membership site where I post extra videos. I do a pair of weekly live streams, and at the top tier, I do 30-minute one-on-one video chats with my supporters. For as little as $2 per month or $21 per year, you can gain access to all of the live streams and the extra videos. The link is down below in the description if you want to learn more or check out that video with 10 more rotten movies that I love. With that said, let's get started. And as I go into this, they're not ranked on any sort of level besides I'm going to go at number 10, the highest Rotten Tomatoes score, to number 1, the lowest Rotten Tomatoes score of a movie that I love. Kicking things off, Top Gun, which only has 57% on Rotten Tomatoes. While Top Gun Maverick was, I think, the best reviewed wide release blockbuster of last year, the original Top Gun, while it made a bazillion dollars, wasn't actually all that well received by critics. In fact, it is rotten on Rotten Tomatoes, and it was kind of written off as just kind of this popcorn film for the MTV generation. It was also perceived of by a lot of people as just military propaganda, trying to recruit people for this romanticized version of the United States military, just saving the day, playing volleyball. And so its reviews, not so great. I would imagine that 57% is higher than it would have been if the website existed back in the 80s when it originally came out.
I feel the need for speed.
As for me, this is one of the first movies I ever remember watching. Some of my earliest childhood memories are of my family watching Top Gun, and when it gets to the love-making scene, my parents kicking me out, and I was like, I don't know what was going on there. Whenever that Take My Breath Away song kicks in, they kick me out of the room, and then later on I understood exactly what was going on there. But this is one of those movies that has just always been there with me. In fact, my parents bought the soundtrack for it, and we had it on vinyl and listened to it on all the time, and I was dumb as a kid, so I thought that Tom Cruise sang all of the songs on the soundtrack and Kelly sang all the lady songs on it because I didn't understand how this all worked. But just a movie that, yeah, it's a silly movie on a lot of ways, but it is effective, it's exciting, it's fun. It's all the things that it's supposed to be. It delivers a blockbuster experience. Critics got it wrong. Next up, Blade 1 and 2. Both of them have a 57% on Rotten Tomatoes. And this one is interesting to me because history has been very kind to both of these films. The first one, in a lot of ways, is given credit for starting to pave the way for the modern era of comic book movies after Batman and Robin. Then out of the blue, you get Blade, which is not an A-list character, not someone that was widely known, but it became this big hit movie and a franchise. And it proved you don't need an A-lister to be successful. And then, of course, it was followed by X-Men and Spider-Man that kind of really brought in this modern era that has lasted over 20 years now. But people look at Blade and they say that was a key piece in changing the trajectory of the comic book movie genre, getting it back on path. And then the second movie, a lot of people consider it to be even better than the first film. It's directed by Guillermo del Toro, Oscar winner. This is like a prestige caliber director with a lot of statues on his mantle, but he also likes nerdy stuff. So he did a Blade movie. I prefer Blade 1 to Blade 2, but they're like this to me. I mean, they're two, the second one doesn't rehash the first one. It does something different. So it's a little bit of a matter of preference in my mind, but both of them have great aesthetics, have a unique vibe, awesome choreography, cool vampire, and then the coolest of the superheroes or comic book movie adaptations, Blade himself, played by Wesley Snipes. And so they're movies that, once again, if they were reevaluated now, they would be much better reviewed than they were at the time, but films that they were just kind of written off as just these martial arts horror films then. Even on that point, though, it's also groundbreaking as one of the earliest examples of a Hollywood production learning from the Hong Kong style of choreography. I mean, this is the time period where Jackie Chan and Jet Li were starting to transition over, and even John Woo with kind of the action and gun fu stuff. And Hollywood was only starting to learn the idea of better choreography, wider shots, longer takes. And this is one of those examples of it. It was cutting edge at the time in Hollywood to do fights like this. And it was in a comic book movie for a character most people weren't familiar with, and it stood the test of time. Then we have Man of Steel. And as much as a wing of the internet wants you to believe that everybody absolutely loves this film, it's actually a very polarizing film. A 56% on Rotten Tomatoes doesn't mean that they rated it a 5.6 out of 10 or 56 out of 100%. It means that 56% of critics recommend the film and 44% don't recommend the film. It's a binary one. Do you recommend it or not? It's what percentage of critics recommend a film, which means it's pretty close to split down the middle. Half of critics say it's good. Half of critics say you can skip this one. And when you talk to a lot of normal people, that's not far off from reality. A lot of people view this one as just too dark. Superman's supposed to be hopeful and optimistic like that symbol on his chest stands for, and the movie's just a little bit too bleak. The context of Jonathan Kent dying doesn't sit right with people, and the third act is just too much noise. A lot of people are in that category. Not me. I've always enjoyed the film, but it's a movie that every time I rewatch it, I appreciate it a little bit more and get more what Zack Snyder was going for. So by now that we're able to look back on it 10 years later, this is one of my absolute favorite films in the DCEU, and a great example of how to bring Superman into the 21st century, have a score that's not competing with John Williams' score, but does something new and different with it. So this is a film that it is sad to me that we never got a true Man of Steel 2, because I love this film. Number 7, Bloodsport, with a 46% on Rotten Tomatoes. For those of you not familiar with the American martial arts movie scene of the 80s and 90s, this is the movie that launched Jean-Claude Van Damme's career. And it was kind of like, out of nowhere, he stars in this film, and people that love the martial arts genre immediately are like, I want more of this guy, let's put him in more stuff, and his career was started. As for me, this is the first R-rated movie that I ever watched. In the summer of 1989, my family had moved to Texas the year before. We traveled back. I was spending the night over at my friend's house in California, and one of their dads had rented Bloodsport. So after the parents went to bed, us 7-year-olds put on Bloodsport, and I fell in love with this movie. It's one of the movies I have rewatched the most times. Like at night, this is the sort of movie I put on when I want to go to bed. And essentially, it's a tournament fighter that showcases all of these different martial arts styles, and in particular, Jean-Claude Van Damme jumping up in the air and doing the splits and kicking people in the face. On a cinematic level, on a script level, on a dialogue level, on an acting level, it's indefensible. I've even had people check it out and watch the movie, be like, Sean, this is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It's like, well, you're watching it wrong. You watched a movie. You're supposed to be watching a martial arts movie. If you want to watch an awesome martial arts tournament fighter, check out Bloodsport. If you're looking for cinema, it's probably not the right direction to go, but this is one of the great American martial arts films of the 80s and 90s. Then we have National Treasure, the Nicolas Cage film about him stealing the Declaration of Independence.
The only way to protect the Declaration is to steal it.
And it only has a 46% on Rotten Tomatoes. This is one of the ones that is also pretty surprising to me. Like, when I see Bloodsport has a 46%, I go, sure, this is not a movie made for critics. National Treasure, though, I just think it's like a really enjoyable, broad appeal adventure film. And it's the kind of movie that it seemed like everybody loved it when it came out. Like, sure, we made fun of it for its silly premise, but then you watch it and it was like, yeah, it delivers on all the fun that you get with a ridiculous premise like that. You get a sequel that people seem to also really enjoy. And looking backwards, people seem to look fondly on it. So seems like the kind of movie that would just be like, yeah, that's fun, solid, family entertainment.
You think there is a treasure map on the back of the Declaration of Independence?
The map is invisible.
It's only got a 46%. I wonder if some of that is that it is just like such a, like, national patriotism kind of film, which just has a certain sentimentality towards America that perhaps a lot of critics didn't appreciate, especially when the movie came out. People were frustrated with wars and engagements we were tangled in. I don't know if it was that, because the movie itself, it delivers what you want from a movie with this premise, with this cast. It's a lot of fun. Moving into the top 5, we got Tommy Boy with only 39%. For those of you not raised in the 90s, this is the Chris Farley comedy classic. Anyone my age loves this movie, saw it a million times, can quote the entire film to you.
But that was awesome.
And it made Chris Farley one of the top comedic actors of the 90s, as well as David Spade. Just their pairing was so fun, so funny, and made them these big, gigantic names. And I don't feel like either one of them had any other films that came close to matching just the magic that was Tommy Boy. But comedy tends to be very timely. And so it's a movie that teenagers in the 90s, like myself, saw this and thought, that's incredible. And a bunch of 40-year-olds in the 90s were like, oh, what is this juvenile, stupid film? That's the way comedy works. It works for one generation, not for another. My son shows me stuff all the time, and I'm like, what is wrong with my son? And I'm sure in a few years, there's going to be comedies coming out that he's going to think are the greatest thing ever, and I will be the Rotten Tomatoes certified critic giving it a rotten score. Thus, 25 years from now, someone will be making videos like this, trashing 40-year-old men like me of today. But Tommy Boy, its target audience loved it. Critics didn't get it. Number 4, Armageddon. Way back in the day, we got 2 different movies about space rocks trying to blow up the Earth. We had Deep Impact and we had Armageddon. I watched Deep Impact one time in the theater, and I have not rewatched it in 25 years since. Armageddon, I think, is a wildly entertaining film about mankind almost going extinct and a lot of people dying. This is the most fun you can have with that premise.
Yeah, one more thing. None of them want to pay taxes again.
But it's only got a 43% on Rotten Tomatoes. This is a movie that is the starting ground for where I have my term Taco Bell movies. These are cinematic fast food. They're movies that you love to consume them. They're very enjoyable, and at the same time, you know they're not actually very good. This is not fine dining cinema. This is highly entertaining. They're cooking with grease, butter, sugar, all of that stuff, and wildly entertaining stuff. That's what Armageddon is to me. And so this is also 90s Michael Bay, where he was really establishing himself as a guy that can blow things up, have these big sweeping films that are taking place in multiple locations. Like, this is kind of like the test reel. This is the starting point for the formula for where his Transformers movies kind of drew from, is what he did with Armageddon. Also, an insanely good cast. Some of it was intentional. Bruce Willis was a big A-lister at the time. Ben Affleck was not. Ben Affleck was on the rise, but they spotted this guy and put him in there, and you look back now and it's like, Ben Affleck, he wasn't that yet. Liv Tyler wasn't Liv Tyler yet. And it was convenient that her dad was able to write a love song that could play over Ben Affleck banging her outside, which is very awkward when you stop to think about the implications of all of that. But all these side actors, everyone is just great. And while it is a ton of fun watching Michael Bay blow up the Earth and then save the Earth, also pulls a tear out of your eye in the final moments with everything that takes place. It's sappy, it's cheesy, but it works. Bringing us into the top 3, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1990, as well as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze. The first one only had a 42% on Rotten Tomatoes. Second one only has a 35%. I'll actually put these in kind of different categories. Like, I look at Ninja Turtles 2, Secret of the Ooze. That to me is a Taco Bell Ninja Turtles movie. It's stupid. It doesn't make a lot of sense. You get Super Shredder in the end. Vanilla Ice shows up.
Go long! Turtle in the open!
Like, this is very much superficial, goofy entertainment. but I still think it's highly entertaining. I think it works really well. And as someone that now has kids, all three of my kids still really enjoy this movie. And so it holds up as kind of this wacky, goofy Ninja Turtles film from 30 years ago. However, I would say that just the first one, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 1990, is just a really good adaptation of the Ninja Turtles that is able to blend the tones of the animated show and the original comics really nicely to find something that has the seriousness of the original comic run while also being entertaining for people that want cowabunga pizza Ninja Turtles at the exact same time. It's a film that I feel like if it was reevaluated now would have a dramatically higher score.
I love being a turtle!
Secret of the Ooze might still be way down low, but I think the first one, it's a film that when it came out in 1990, a bunch of 40-year-old men were like, oh goodness, really? Cowabunga saying turtles eating pizza? This is ridiculous. But I think it has aged wonderfully. I have shown it to all of my kids, and anytime I'm like, hey, we got to go watch Ninja Turtles, they're always on board. They hold back on watching the Michael Bay produced ones from 10 years ago. They're not crazy about those ones. They're totally fine to rewatch these ones from the 90s. Anytime I suggest we watch them, which is quite frequently because I normally want to rewatch them. So I think this is a movie that the critics just got it wrong at the time, and modern day critics would probably do better with. Our second lowest Rotten Tomatoes score will be for Rocky IV. I have said it many times before. Stallone's my favorite actor. Rocky is my favorite movie character of all time. Here in my office, right there is a full-size framed poster of Rocky, and right over here is a quote from Rocky on this wall. But Rocky IV, for a long time the highest grossing sports movie of all time, only has a 39%. It was trashed by critics, but Stallone had his finger on the pulse of audiences, of the zeitgeist of the world, and delivered this movie that people just absolutely ate it up. And here we are, almost 40 years later. I would say this is easily the most rewatchable and consumable Rocky film. It is cheesy, it's wacky, it's goofy. But all of that is its charm. All of that is what makes it fun. It's a revenge sports film.
I must break you.
It's got Rocky climbing mountains while Ivan Drago is pumping steroids and running around in a science lab. It is wild. They literally talk about how they were like firing shotguns and banging chains on the ground to invent the sound design for the boxing matches. The movie is literally about 40% montages. And especially in the back half, it's even higher percentage of montages, but it works. It's a sort of film that breaks the mold of all your traditional ideas. A movie's supposed to be this, and it's not. It's this whole other thing. It's a montage film. It's an 80s product. It is the peak of Stallone vanity, which was incredibly entertaining at the same time. It's so many things that are not the normal formula of what makes for a great movie. But it's a movie that absolutely stood the test of time. And right now, there's thousands of people watching the training montages right now while working out because it is just that like motivating of a film that just pumps you up. And finally, Home Alone 2, Lost in New York. The original Home Alone itself has a surprisingly low Rotten Tomatoes score in the 60s. It is fresh, but it is just barely fresh despite being one of the most celebrated and rewatched Christmas movies of the last 35 years. It made roughly $1 bazillion, so a sequel was inevitable. Home Alone 2 came out. It made $1 bazillion again, but it only has a 35% on Rotten Tomatoes. And this seems to once again be a classic example of a movie that gave its target audience exactly what they wanted, and a movie that critics look at and can so quickly go, oh, it's just a ludicrous rehash of the first one. Same exact thing happens again, except somehow he's now in New York City, which makes absolutely no sense. It's improbable. There's no logical reason that you can explain as to why the Wet Bandits or the Sticky Bandits would be in the exact same place at the exact same time. It makes no sense whatsoever. But logic isn't supposed to be what pulls together a Home Alone movie. They are movies that manage to have like a certain heart to them, a lesson to teach Kevin, and a bunch of over-the-top slapstick ultraviolence. And this one delivers even more ultraviolence.
Now why would anybody soak a rope in kerosene? Merry Christmas.
Even more little technology things. Everyone my age wanted to have one of those little hand recorder deals that he had and played around with it. It's a movie that delivered all of that stuff. Once again, 30 years later, every December, my family starts watching Home Alone and Home Alone 2. Sometimes in June and July, we'll watch Home Alone and Home Alone 2 because they're just like timeless family entertainment that they simply work and entertain. And sure, logically speaking, it's just a rehash that makes no sense. But it doesn't matter because it works. It's effective. All the things it's supposed to do, it pulls off. It tugs at the heartstrings. It makes you laugh while Harry and Marv suffer catastrophic injuries for our entertainment. It's great! Remember, if you enjoyed this video, there is a companion to it over on Patreon with 10 more rotten movies that I love. You can check that out at the link down below in the description. I've also done some other videos like this right over there. Thank you so much for watching, and keep talking movies and TV to